Hello, and welcome to the final plenary session of the 2024 British Centre for Literary Translation Summer School. My name is Rachael Daum, and the title of this panel is this is the Publishers Panel, The Place of Digital Publishing. I am just going to give a brief description of myself. I am a white woman in my early 30s. I have quite cropped, short, dark brown hair with gold-rimmed glasses, and I'm sitting in a gray chair against a white background. I am going to briefly introduce our wonderful panelists today, and I should say hello, good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are tuning in from. We're very happy to have you. So for our panelists, first up, we have Sohini Basak, who is a freelance editor and writer from India, currently publishing poetry at Words Without Borders. Previously, she was a commissioning editor with HarperCollins India, where she published literary translations from various Indian languages. Sohini is also a writer, and her first poetry collection, We Live in the Newness of Small Differences, lovely title, was awarded the inaugural International Beverley Manuscript Prize and published in 2018. She studied literature and creative writing at the Universities of Delhi, Warwick, and East Anglia, where she received the 2015 Malcolm Bradbury Grant for Poetry. Other honors include a Toto Funds the Arts Writing Award in 2017, a Vijay Nambasan Sangam House Fellowship in 2022, and a Speculative Literature Foundation Gulliver Travel Grant in 2024. Next up, we have Eric M.B. Becker, who is a writer, literary translator, and editor. Currently, he serves as digital director and senior editor at Words Without Borders. He has translated numerous authors from the Portuguese, and his work has been recognized by Fulbright, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Penheim Fund, and the Aldo and Jean Scaglione Prize. His translation of Jaimilia Pereira de Almeida's That Hair was a finalist for the Penn Translation Prize. He is co-founder of the Pessoa Festival, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, Foreign Affairs, Freeman's, and other media. Finally, Andrew Felsher is a New York City-based writer, editor, and film producer. He is the author of the prose chapbook Notes from a Prison Cell, out from Bottlecat Press in 2023, which has been translated into Portuguese. His writing has appeared in Epoch, Sao Paulo Review, Heavy Feather Review, Fiction Writers Review, among other publications. In 2022, he founded and has since edited 128 Lit, winner of CLMP's Firecracker Award for Best Debut Magazine. I'll also add here that another winner of the CLMP Firecracker Award for Magazine and General Excellence is Words Without Borders. That was announced a couple of weeks ago, I believe. Congratulations again. And just a brief word to my own bio. My name is Rachael Daum. My pronouns are she, her. I am a translator from Serbian, Croatian, Russian, and German into English, and I am the Communications and Awards Manager for the American Literary Translators Association, ALTA. I'll also just put in a brief note here. I'm very happy that and honored to have had a number of translations of my own placed in both Words Without Borders and 128 Lit. So it's lovely to be able to speak with you all today. I feel very lucky to be able to do so. All right, so let's get going. I want to kind of start the panel with a little bit of table setting. I would like for each of our panelists to introduce in just a minute or less the digital publication that you currently work with or have worked with in the past, just to introduce it to people who maybe are new to the community, would like a refresher, anything like that. And again, as you unmute yourself and introduce your publication, please also give a brief visual description of yourself. Let's start with Eric. Would you please introduce Words Without Borders?
Great. Thank you so much, Rachael. Thanks for having me as well. Thanks also to Mayada, who extended this invitation, and to all the folks at BCLT. A quick visual description of myself. I'm a 40-year-old bald white male wearing a gray shirt against a background of a rather nondescript conference room here at a farm stay in rural Brazil. diplomas and such on the wall behind me, not mine, as it turns out. The law was not one of my pursuits. To give you a quick rundown of Words Without Borders, so we're a daily digital literary publication. We were founded in 2003 and have since published writing from more than 140 countries and as many languages. We publish across genres: fiction, poetry, essay, interviews, you name it. We also produce both virtual and in-person events and have an education program as well, WWB Campus, which aims to bring the literature we've published, so international writing, into classrooms, college and high school, etc. And so our mission in that way is rather wide-ranging, includes obviously, promoting international writing, but also, trying to build a readership, in the coming generations. So.
Thank you very much, Eric. Let's move on to Andrew. Would you please give a description of yourself and introduce 128 Lit?
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Mayada, for setting this up, and thanks for having me, BCLT. I'm Andrew Felsher, the editor of description. I am a white male in his 30s. I have short, brown, curly hair, thick glasses that are blue, and a light blue shirt against a white background. So I am the founder and editor of 128 Lit, an international platform that promotes new and emerging voices, along with a lot of award-winning writers. And we also have artwork and film. Our mission is to really be an anti-colonial space that really interrogates the ways in which literature and various art forms interact with each other and circulate internationally. We really want to be international, and we've published works in many languages, and I think that we have ambitions to become a press, and we also are getting into film as well. So there's a lot of places that we want to go.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear that, Andrew. I can't wait to see what happens. And finally, Sohini, would you please give a description of yourself and describe? Yes.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks BCLT and Mayada for setting this up. Hi, everyone. I'm Sohini. I'm joining from Bangalore in India. I'm a brown woman in a black t-shirt with short black hair, pale pink glasses, dangly earrings, and behind me is a line of postcards on a off-white wall. I'm a freelance editor and writer, and late last year I joined Words Without Border as their first poetry editor, and it's been very exciting to not just publish poetry in translation from various parts of the world, but also prose about poetry, because that's something we don't often see in translation. So essays from poets or essays about translating poetry by translators and poets, and also conversation about poetry and translation between poets and translators. As a freelance editor, I do a bunch of things. Basically, I do everything that I wasn't doing as a commissioning editor at my previous corporate publishing job. So I think what I enjoy most is working with small presses, working with writers who are probably working on their first collections of poetry or first novels, and reading submissions for small presses and the like. Yeah.
That's also interesting. Thank you to all of you for introducing your areas of expertise, and I look forward to getting to dig into them with you. Before we get in fully to the discussion, I do want to flag that participants, please do feel free to engage in the chat that you'll see along the side, or there's a chat button at the bottom, and we will be leaving plenty of time at the end for a Q&A. So if you have questions for our panelists, please do put them in there. Don't put them in the chat because they might get lost, but we will be leaving time at the end for the Q&A, so please go ahead and put those in as we go along. Great. Okay, with the table fully set, I'm interested in digging into first, a bit more generally speaking, about the role of digital publications in like a larger publishing ecosystem. I think a good way to get into that is maybe with a bit of a case study. Eric, you are a publisher of literary translation and you are a translator of literary works yourself. I wonder if you would be willing to kind of compare and contrast your experience as a translator and as a publisher in the digital publishing landscape.
Sure. Thank you, Rachael, for that question. I mean, I guess one way to answer that question is and hopefully a satisfying one is, I feel like for me anyway, my work with international literature, whether as an editor or as a translator, started a little bit over 10 years ago now. And both of these roles, sort of as a translator and as an editor, have really developed alongside one another. So the way I sort of broke into digital publishing was actually with Asymptote as well. This would have been in 2013 or so, and at the time too, I was working alongside a lot of some of the really great translators we know today, and sort of my generation as well. Sophie Hughes, Nate West, Megan McDowell, and we had a bit of a cohort there, and so I feel like my work as a translator and as an editor, I feel like those are roles that are very much linked, and I don't sort of see them differently. I mean, I think the thing that digital publications, and we can get into this more later, obviously provide in an ideal space is access in sort of democratized access, and that in that sort of thing as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess I think I will sort of actually stop there, and maybe as we get further into the discussion, I can elaborate that on that a little bit more. But
Yeah.
I sort of feel like those roles for me have always been very much linked, and it was my way into publishing, shall we say. It was through whether as a translator or as an editor, sort of working with digital publications, and certainly as an editor, that's where I've stayed.
Yeah, I'm really compelled by that, the idea of these things developing alongside one another. And I think that does make a lot of sense in kind of tracking your own trajectory. I'm also compelled by the idea using like having a cohort. I think that something so lovely about these digital spaces in particular is the idea of being able to create and maintain community, kind of flattening the hierarchy in a way and bringing people together. Yeah, we'll definitely dig more into that. Thank you. I think I'd like to turn to Sohini for a moment. So you are Words Without Borders' first poetry editor, which is very exciting. You speak in your interview at Words Without Borders, like your introductory interview, and everybody should read it. It's a great interview. You speak about letting go of static definitions of a general reader, which I also found to be quite compelling. I'm interested to hear you speak more about the sorts of readers beyond the mythical general that you kind of hope to reach, and what are your thoughts about how the digital publishing in particular can help accomplish that?
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel, for that question. And And I think I was also coming from, also contrasting my previous life as a, working as an editor for corporate publishing house in India. And here the market's quite different for English language readers, the trade publishing at least. But, it was also with one of the big five publishing houses and connected to the markets in the UK and the US. And I think I was also coming from the various kinds of hierarchies there exist in the worldwide English publishing scene. But also, if you take any location like India, much of the books are being published for a very metropolitan upper class, upper caste reader, and that I think would translate similarly for other locations as well, especially for traditional mainstream publishing, and we want to break free from that because your reader will not always be cisgender or male or rich or sitting in a city or being monolingual or having a certain kind of studied a certain kind of history with or without the colonial impact of where they are working and sitting in, where the work is being produced. Because I think for trade or mainstream publishing, all of that would have implications on marketing and book covers and the way you present books, and therefore readers and who would pick them up. But with, I think, digital public publishing, that's more fluid, I think, right from the get-go, because you don't really have, that you don't want to reach out. I mean, you do sometimes want to reach out to maybe categories of people. Again, that I hope, as we go further along in time, we can get more and more open about that. Even demographic groups, because I think people read very interestingly and differently, and people read, things that are completely different from their own identities or their own backgrounds. Because I think we also read to know the other spaces. We read about the past or the future or variously creatively. So I think to have one notion of a reader, a very traditional reader who would go and buy a book versus a reader who can just chance upon a work online and then dig more about the writer or the genre, or figure out that, hey, this is also something that I want to read and I want to read more of. Or here's a poem or an essay in a language I will probably not pick up in my lifetime, but I love what they're doing with language and translation. Yeah, so, and I think a lot of translators have also spoken about this. I think Anton Hurt has spoken about this in his, the Booker interview. Yeah, I think so. There's lots of us, yeah, who want to increase, I think, maybe the larger gatekeeping publishing world's vision for a reader.
Yeah, just like bust those gates open and let everybody read everything. I'm really interested in this idea of, and I will, as I think I've made clear, I'm not a publisher myself, but I eagerly consume literature like in book form and online, and just a very purposeful way that you describe how a book can get to a person versus like on the internet. We can kind of take advantage of like that instant gratification almost. I'm not sure if that's maybe a good way to sort of align it, but being like, oh, I've never seen something written in this way before, and I can get it right now. All I need is a phone and internet access. I'm not sure if that's a good way to sum up, but from a consumer perspective, that's, yeah, kind of how I see it. It's lovely.
Yeah. I also worry about the future of just that, in terms of, I mean, on one hand, with trade publishing and supply chains, there's that, but also just internet laws in different countries might change in the near future. Yeah, just climate change and what it will do to our electricity and places in the global south, especially.
These are challenges in perhaps a near future, and I like the idea of of you kind of pushing against that and planning against that in the now. And that's not to put too rosy a view on it, but I think it's very good work. I think from here, I'd like to turn, I have a question for both Andrew and Sohini, because you both have worked, like Sohini, you were just speaking about working for a major trade publisher, and Andrew, 128 Lit is both a digital publication and a physical publication, a print. I have my copy right here of issue 2, which is also a lovely cohort of translators and authors. Because you both currently work or have worked with both digital and print publishing, I wonder if you could describe how these projects from the publishing side kind of look differently, like how the one affects the other. I think I'd like to turn first to Andrew because, as you mentioned, you have hopes that that 128 Lit could become a press, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong. There's a chapbook coming out from Ukrainian, translated by Hanna Leliv. I would wonder if you'd be willing to speak about how these look different from the publishing perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So when we started the platform in 2022, nobody knew anything about 128 Lit. It was just this mysterious, unknown platform. And we saw digital space as a means to spread the word because nobody knew about us. So we needed to be visible online. At the same time, our mission is international in its ambition, which can become idealistic and not actually effective. So we were interrogating this, and we figured that the fastest way to spread things throughout the internet is, or throughout the world, is through the internet, because everyone, as you mentioned before, has access. And our platform is open access. We don't force people to sign up for anything in order to view our pages, because we wanted to be cognizant of people, how they experience the page, the aesthetics and the content, and is it inviting? So I think that is inseparable from the mission, is its accessibility. Beyond that, the relationship between translation and digital publishing and physical publishing is that we originally started as a physical publisher, but we wanted to, with our first issue, which was a combination of artwork and translation, prose, poetry, and so on, where actually art was, we structured it so that art led literature instead of vice versa. We arranged the issue around artwork, and we found pieces that we thought were in conversation with those art pieces. So in that sense, we were unique from the start. I co-founded the platform with a filmmaker and artist. So we're very impacted by like third cinema and just anti-colonial forms. So we view the platform as a movement between genres and physical print and digital space. Our ambition to become a press was that we really want to be able to publish what makes most sense for us. And sometimes that might be a short film online, sometimes it might be a single poem, or sometimes it might be a book. And we don't want to confine ourselves to a regular schedule. So we want to be informed by the work and how we want it to circulate and how we want our readers to engage with it. Beyond that, going back to the formation of the platform, I view it started with a translation, a Portuguese translation, actually. And I recognize that many of the pieces that I'm drawn to are not written originally in English. They are translations into English. And I also was having a piece of mine translated into Portuguese, yet it wasn't being taken by American publishers. So I was wondering, is my work good or not? Or does it exist more prominently in Portuguese and English? Why is that? So I think this tension between languages and wondering how to express things that we're passionate about, or how to, and it was also during COVID. So we started in 2022. So there was a strong impulse to connect with other people. And I think that people were so confined that digital space started to flourish. And I think that it just made sense to find a platform where people could engage. And like on Instagram, we were posting new pieces and people could engage with a single poem in an Instagram story, and it's very accessible and people enjoy it. And most of our readers are online. And they also view our online space to buy our print issues. So that's kind of where we stand.
Yeah. I like hearing about that kind of history of how you've brought the platforms through, and that it was kind of, I don't know if this is me like cherry picking here, but I like the idea that you are driven by passion and what you want to bring to people, especially in a time where we were all very, very separate. We're all very good at Zoom now, for lots of reasons. Interested in the fact that you don't have like a set schedule, and that you bring things out as you feel, as I think you said, they make sense to you. How do you decide what makes sense? Can I ask about that? Or is that a trade secret?
No, I mean, well, first, each of our issues has a different approach. So our first issue, as I mentioned, that was very strongly informed by artwork, and it featured a few translations. And our second issue, which you just showed everyone, is our art director wanted to, so we were thinking about our mission, and that we had a lot of translations into English, but what about the original languages? And we wanted to celebrate not only the appearance of different languages, but we wanted to make sure some of our multilingual readers, or some readers that weren't, that English wasn't their first language, we wanted to make sure that our platform was welcoming to them. So we created a multilingual issue, which was a really fun process of reaching out to different translators. Rachael's in this issue, and then the beyond that, things make sense. We view the platform as, how does each piece interact with each other? Our prose editor just came up, like, born out of our second issue. Our prose editor, Avrina, she extracted the theme of what is home, which is very necessary in international literature. And so during this open reading period, we invited people to respond to this question, and we ended up accepting a couple of writers, and this is their first time being published by a literary magazine. So that feels very rewarding as a platform, to have their pieces in conversation with very well-known writers. And in that sense, we feel like the platform became an effective space and a mode for people to engage with.
That's great. Yeah. Sohini, do you have anything that you would like to add from both a digital and print publishing perspective?
Yeah, I think it's like the context of India might be relevant to translators who are based, not in the UK or the US. I think digital platforms provide an immediate international audience for your work. So, and then you might get picked up by presses in the UK and the US. And this is quite important, because even though India is the third largest sort of produces the third largest number of books per year, it's mostly educational books, and trade publishing, I think, would consist of only 4%. So that, and the literary translation would even be a very small percentage of that 4%. So the readership is actually very, very, very small. So I think translators and writers here are always eager to get more readers, and I think digital platforms provide that avenue very smoothly. And then you can get published in the UK and the US, and then your book may be eligible for awards, or just you get more readers in general. Personally, I think I would also like to add that for me, being able to now publish digitally has been such a gift because digital publishing just allows you to, publish writers from anywhere. Like it doesn't matter it doesn't matter who is publishing from where and who is publishing whom, because when I was publishing for the corporate publishing house, and although we are in India, we just couldn't get our books across to Pakistan, which is just here. So we had to stop publishing Pakistani writers because we couldn't send their books to them, and we had to go via some third country. Whereas because of embargoes and geopolitical new laws and orders, so it allows for just artists and writers and translators to really connect without all these really silly orders from people who wouldn't want to share. I mean, we're right here, but we can't send books across. So I think that also opens up the space for more writing and more translated writing to reach to lots more readers.
Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful way to kind of, again, bust those gates open, as it were, and share in a way that you wish to, which is subversive and great. And I love that you're able to do that work now. I think that kind of segues nicely into speaking more about the trajectory of digital publishing in terms of the different, Sohini, you were just speaking about different embargoes and borders being closed. Similarly, I know that there are limitations that are put in also in terms of technology. I guess this is a question I'd kind of like to open this to Eric and Andrew, but Sohini, of course, also feel free to jump in. I wonder if you would be able to speak about the trajectory of digital publishing as you've seen it, Eric, in your time for the past 10 years with Words Without Borders, and Andrew with 128 Lit, which is now in its third year. I'm wondering about what sorts of changes you've seen in aesthetic, like what audiences are asking for. But I also want to open it up to speak about the limitations or the possibilities of search engines and SEO, which if you're not familiar, is search engine optimization.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Rachel. And I'll try to take it. I might ask you for a reminder on the second part of that question, just because I feel like there's so much to bite off.
Sorry, it's a long question.
No, it's a terrific question, exactly for that reason. And I think it's perhaps helpful, at least in the WWB context, to remember sort of when the magazine was founded 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago, as the case is, it was really about just essentially, in a nutshell, it was about solving or at least contributing to a solution to the 3% problem, right? And just sort of the relative lack of international writing in English, particularly in the US, but in English as well. Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you mind me butting in and asking, could you please explain the 3% problem to those who may not be familiar?
Sure, absolutely. So the 3% problem basically being that historically, not more than 3% of the books published in English by English language publishers have been works in translation. And there's of course someone who's done some terrific work on this for the years. Obviously, is Chad Post. There's the 3% blog, etc. And I seem to recall him sharing several years ago when I was on a panel with him that in fact the 3% problem is really like a 1.5% problem once you take off. Once you take sort of academic publishing, or say I think other let's say non-literary work, let's say. So when we get into non-literary work as well, that figure becomes even more depressing in some ways. But and so I think when WW was started 20 years ago, it was really about just increasing the amount of writing available from other languages in English. And of course, that is still, I mean, if you want to encapsulate quickly our mission, that's still it. What's obviously changed in the last 20 years, and even over the last 10 years since I've been with the magazine, is that, international literature and translation has become increasingly mainstream. So you're seeing, I should say, it's not that mainstream publications never published international work, of course, but perhaps that it's very much a part of what they do now, at least in comparison to what happened before. So, part of that has subsequently sort of caused us to think about, okay, so what is our role, certainly, given that there is more work, international work in translation being published, sort of how can we still contribute? And one of the ways that we've decided to do that is focusing on, say, work from indigenous languages or endangered languages, or just frankly languages, work from languages or literary traditions that simply do not receive as much attention, even if the work does come to us through, say, like an inherited colonial language or something too. So it's even a question of sort of expanding the definition of what actually is writing, even in French or in Portuguese or in in whatever language it may be. So I think one of the things Andrew, of course, spoke sort of to 128's mission to really sort of make anti-colonialism a part of his platform. I mean, that sort of is part of this conversation too, is sort of like, where can we how can we make what we're publishing meaningful beyond the fact that it is sort of coming from another language? And then maybe I'll stop there, and then we can get into sort of some of the technology and how that's changed and how that changes access in particular, because there is, I think generally speaking, we tend to think about, digital publishing and the technologies available to us in terms of what is cutting edge, et cetera. But there's also a question of access across, in the ways that sort of libraries, still in the present, thankfully, but depending on where you are, are a crucial part of access to literature and to books. The way you develop your platform is also every bit as much a sort of social project as it is a question of making sure that it works on the latest iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like hearing about how the mission has sort of evolved. I'm sorry, my cat hasn't done this all week at BCLT, and now he's joined us. Sorry for the distraction. But yes, I'm very interested to hear about more about how that mission is served by the technology that you're able to bring in. Oh, I'm sorry. He's been very naughty. Andrew, would you like to step in and speak about the trajectory?
Thanks, Eric, for that. And thanks for bringing up mathematics in the 3% problem, because mathematics was very embedded in the formation of 128-lit. And before I get into the trajectory of the platform, I wanted to mention that this problem of language was very much a propellant for 128-lit, that we saw the issues with English as a language. So we had trouble finding a word to use to start the platform. So we figured numbers don't really belong to place as much. So we should start the platform with a number, so it absolves us of the obligation of finding a word. So 128 was a number that was probing my writing. So, and it's an exponential number. So we wanted to create a platform that responds to accumulations of pain and colonialism and the pain embedded in the language and what's done to languages and histories. So the number, so it's really about a platform that wants to respond to this enormous avalanche of accumulated things. So that's how the number and the name was formed. Beyond that, New York City, although it is the heart of the publishing industry in the United States, if you really think about the numbers, that the population is only 0.1% of the world population. So the odds of encountering a writer whose work is really incredible comparatively to the world's population, it's very much an anomaly if they're from New York City, but that's just a number. So the trajectory of 128 Lit is we started, as I mentioned earlier, with it being a print platform, but digital space was necessary to spread the word because that's what was needed. And we also view because the way we're structured is that we have like pretty much one print issue a year, or we're just getting into a press now. But the digital space, we view that as a very important resource in that it's nimble. We can quickly, if we want to post something that's very timely, that's digital space is perfect. And a lot of our readers can't afford to buy the print issue, and they read our works online. So when we bring in, and we also don't dump an entire issue at once online. We like to give each writer and translator attention because we want them to experience editorial care, and we also want them to be read. Like one thing that really, we don't just want to use writers and translators as a means to elevate our platform. We want to make sure that they are benefiting from being part of this place. So we also have a newsletter where we will feature and spotlight writers and translators that are part of the platform, and we generate a lot of, and that's where we generate most of our readers and people learn about the platform. And over time, it was just a natural progression to want to become a press too. So we have this chapbook that is a translation from Ukrainian into English called My Women. The pre-order just came out, so we're excited about that, but there's still, we want it to be available more broadly. Right now, the distributor is based in the US, and we want to find ways to make it available internationally too. So it's an ongoing process. And in terms of the word spreading about the platform, and when we use Twitter, we use Instagram like everyone else, and we're just conscious of how, like with SEO, we haven't really done too much work figuring out that's like a next step for us because we've been so focused on the content. But we do make sure that a lot of the contributors are visible on our website, and their links do pretty well on Google searches. So that's where we are now.
That's really great. It's I find the introduction of the way that 128 Lit got named to be very interesting. When you break down the math, I'm not mathematically inclined at all, but I find that to be really interesting. I also seem to recall, Andrew, please correct me if I'm wrong, reading an interview with you where you mentioned another nice thing about 128 Lit is that like it's a number that you might see places and be reminded of the magazine, like on a clock twice a day. Do I have that right?
You do.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be a number that people could say and sounds nice on your tongue. Like I like the way the 128, I actually labored over what number was best because there's many other exponential numbers. Like I don't think I would trust 256 Lit with my literature. 128 Lit just sounded nice.
256 would be too much. It's too high.
Yeah, and people see clocks at 1:28 p.m. and if they're up late, 1:28 a.m. So I wanted them to be subconsciously reminded of us.
I really like that. Since I read that, I definitely have noticed it. So well done. Great. Then I think that I would like to turn to Sohini. So in addition to your work as the first poetry editor for Words Without Borders, you're also a freelance editor. I wonder if you would be able to speak to how the evolving publishing landscape, digital and otherwise, how that influences how you select projects. Do search engines, as we were talking about, feed into that? How do you approach that?
I think again, I think what might resonate with translators here is also I'm just learning how to enjoy my work again after corporate life. So I tend to work with smaller presses, chapbooks. Sundress Press in the US, they have a chapbook series on craft. So I edit one of those. So I think just a way, and they're available freely online. So they're like little PDF that anyone can download from anywhere. So I think more and more I'm getting interested in projects that you work with a writer for a slow period of time and then is available freely and is accessible to readers everywhere. I think that would be useful. Sorry, what was the second part of it? Was there a second part?
No, I was wondering how it is that you choose the projects that you work on. Do you like when you're working with, for example, Sundress, do you seek out places that are freely available online? How do you select your projects? I think that's also interesting for translators to hear.
Oh, I guess, yeah, I think not so much. I don't search for them so much as like if I come across something that looks really interesting, I just reach out to the people there. I think here I do want to say that the translators community on social media was also also very useful and encouraging. And I think a conversation I had with a translator online who I'd never met before was one of the reasons I was able to make the switch from full time to freelance, because she has been doing that for a while, and she just said, "Oh, we have little conversation slots and we can be strangers." And so I think those sorts of networks are pretty interesting.
I think that also, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I think that also kind of feeds into, that matches what Eric was speaking about earlier in terms of like finding a cohort and creating like a network online. That's such a wonderful thing. And especially during like the pandemic years, it's been such a lifesaver. Oh, yes, Eric.
Rachel, if I could just add on to that, because I think it does coming back to sort of the question you asked before, and thinking about digital spaces and SEO and reaching readers. I think very much this. Somebody was speaking a little bit earlier, I think, about also recognizing that, I think it was Sohini, about sort of the plurality of the reader too, and sort of how these different readers, right? And at least in the case of WWB, but also sounds like with 128 lit as well, that readership is very international, right? I mean, we obviously have a core readership in the US, but our readership is very much based around the world. And thinking about this digital question, I mean, not so long ago we did a website redesign, and part of that, of course, was to improve visually sort of the aesthetic of the website itself, but it was also about and to sort of be able to better accommodate several things we've done in the past, and things we're sort of investing in increasingly now, which include sort of publishing the original language alongside translation, audio, video, virtual events, and that sort of thing. But I think you too, Rachel, had mentioned something earlier about how people are accessing this, and whether it's on their phone or whether it's on on their desktop. And we actually did we worked with the Pratt Institute Digital Experiences Center earlier this year to sort of try to understand a little better about our readership, and in fact potential readers, people who don't currently use our site, and sort of what they're looking for in that way. And a big sort of I think the mobile question in particular, for a long time now, has sort of loomed large, and I think that's a conversation that tends to usually it's formed a lot by privilege, shall we say, right? So it's sort of like, in what way can you create sort of a flashier and more engaging publication or product or whatever it is. But there was a presentation I saw several years ago now that struck me quite a bit, which and the person who was making the presentation essentially brought it to our attention. It was a group of it was digital. He was speaking to a bunch of digital arts organizations. And what this person had to say was, that stuck with me ever since, is that we often forget that, and when we're speaking about access and democracy and accessibility, that there is a whole part of the world population whose only form of access to the internet is through their phone. And so, being a free publication, a publication that does hope to expand the audience and make it available, make this literature available to as broad an audience as we can, when we're thinking about how we're improving our website and how, what the mobile experience is like, et cetera, that is something certainly that we have, that's something we think about, as much as we do about making it sort of creating an aesthetically pleasing experience for readers as well. So I think that is something that, depending on, obviously, on a magazine's mission, is something that we should all sort of be thinking about.
Right. Like thinking about, and correct me if I have misunderstood or getting this wrong, thinking through the privilege that we might have, like designing these things on different devices and making sure that they're as accessible as possible. I think that that matches a lot what Andrew also has been speaking about in terms of the platform from 128 Lit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like being able to bring things out as and when you feel the need to reach people and give them the things that you are passionate about, hopefully also to reach them across borders. Yeah, I think that's really compelling. I want to keep an eye on the time here. We have about 22 minutes left. I would like to encourage our audience members, if you haven't already, please put any questions that you have for our panelists in the Q&A, and we will come to them shortly. I think there's a lot of conversation to still be had. It's very great. I guess before we get to the Q&A, I am curious, would any of you like to speak to whether you have, this is kind of getting on a different tack. Do you have advice for emerging translators, or maybe not emerging translators, who are looking to be published more in digital spaces? Do you have advice for how they can think through how to, like, where to find to publish, and why?
And there's some really great platforms and magazines that publish translated work, like Asymptote and Circumference Magazine. And I know like Anomaly has, that's like a digital platform. They've done a lot of good translation work. I'm just mostly reading as much translated work and seeing where people publish, and just following that route. We really love finding new voices, that especially translators that are relatively new. We really love publishing their work. We approach every submission very rigorously and intentionally and thoughtfully. So just keep being thoughtful as a reader, and yeah, follow the right places.
I'd say too. I mean, another thing that's sort of helpful, and I think when you're first starting out, perhaps is less clear. At least it was less clear to less clear to me, is sort of really taking into account. I mean, I feel like one of the more unsatisfying answers that people tend to give, to this question, but is in fact a good answer, is of course, when you're thinking about submitting to a place, reading what they publish and that sort of thing. And I think that's also a question, it's also tied very much to sort of like what sort of work you want to translate and that sort of thing too, right? Like there's obviously a stark difference between, say, what the New Yorkers would be looking for potentially, right? And what a publication like WWB or 128 or Asymptote are looking for in terms of their sort of openness to experimental work or simply work that may not speak to a quote unquote mainstream audience. So I think it's also worth thinking about. It's almost a question that has to start with you too, which was sort of like, what instead of thinking, oh, this is, I have this goal, say, to publish with a certain magazine, it's thinking about sort of what's the work that's important to you as a translator and who is publishing that work. It's obviously fine to have that ambition to publish, in the New Yorker or the Paris Review or whatever, which is great as well. But it's also worth considering sort of what is the work that you find meaningful and that is going to fulfill you too, because there is obviously, as we all know, and I'm sure some of the other panels have spoken to this, translation, is often a passion project, right? So it's worth thinking about, given sort of the economics of it, sort of, what is important to you as a translator in terms of the work you want to get out there, and who are the editors, and who, what publications are going to allow you to do that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
No, and the other thing I guess I would say too is, I think some of the things that can be, exciting publishing, say, with WWB or 128, even just listening to what Andrew said, is I think often there are publications who very much look at this relationship with the translator as a partnership. It's very important to what we do is also to, what we publish is as much about the translator as it is about the writer as well, right? One of the things that a core part of our mission is also helping such a, we're collaborating with emerging translators, right? And if you can find an editor or a few editors who are willing to work with you and take an interest in what you're doing and really give your work the attention you would like, I think that can be a really satisfying relationship, both for the editor and for the translator.
Yeah. If you'll indulge me for a moment, just speaking as a translator, I know that there's an author I work with from Russian. I've published translations of hers, both with Words Without Borders and 128 Lit. I've been working with her for over a year, and was trying desperately to place stories, and I was getting rejection after rejection. I thought, oh gosh, maybe I'm just not her translator. And then I met with Susan Harris at Words Without Borders, who said that she was interested in it because she writes weird stuff and it's a weird translation. And it was so satisfying to find somebody who believed in that author's work as much as I did. And I very much found that in Words Without Borders and 128 Lit. And as a translator, it's very satisfying, as you say, Eric, to feel like you're a part of a team, because I know that we've all spoken about how translation can feel quite isolating. But this is a way to make really meaningful connection, which I think has been kind of a recurring theme through this panel. So thank you. I'm just quickly looking at the Q&A. Sohini, I see that you are responding to Albina Alvi, Albina's question about publishing in India. Thank you. If you want to speak your answer aloud, but I think you've been typing for a minute. Would you prefer to answer aloud or keep typing? Oh, to keep typing. Okay, great. Thank you very much. We have a question from Fiona Graham at Words Without Borders and at 128 Lit. Do you have figures on the number of hits from different countries / different language areas? And how does this inform your policies in terms of attracting readers across the globe?
I can start. I know that Eric probably has a bit a more nuanced answer here because Word Without Borders is a little larger than us, but we're constantly looking at like the data of where our readership is digitally. Around 40% of our readers are outside the US, and we have many readers actually in India, and Germany actually is a very big country. So we're constantly trying to figure out ways to make our mission align with actually our practices, and becoming actually an international platform. We are not multilingual online yet, but we are expanding into audio, and that's another initiative of ours. And we started with a long form podcast that I did, and we also are going to have a couple multilingual audio pieces coming out. So we hope that will both expand our the range of forms on our platform, its accessibility, and also increase the scope of the countries that are involved with the platform. But Eric might have more to say about this.
I mean, I would just say yes. I mean, absolutely. We sort of have those figures, and we look at them quite a way. And it you know, I think in many ways, you know, our thinking is similar to Andrew's in a sense. I mean, we think, for example, one of the things over the last few years that we've discovered is we actually have a rather large readership in the Philippines, for example, right? So it's just to give one example, and you know, we start to think about, okay, how can we serve that readership specifically, right? And obviously, of course, you know, we can't sort of create a separate editorial strategy for every location where we have a sort of a critical mass in terms of readership, but it is something that we look at, and one of the ways also that we've sought to serve some of those readerships and some of those audiences has been through our virtual events and that sort of thing as well. But it's definitely something that we think about in terms of, I wouldn't say it doesn't, you know, it obviously doesn't dictate sort of our editorial policy, but it does certainly, I mean, aside from promoting literature, we're also here to serve the readers as well, right? So it does, it is something that we sort of take into consideration and view in terms of sort of serving our readers, certainly.
Yeah. I think that's great. Sohini, do you want to add anything? No. Okay. I just wanted to check. Thank you both for those thoughtful answers. We have a question, bless you, from Mary Jane. I'm quite new to the translation world, but I wanted to ask the panelists whether you have relationships with the original publishers of the works that have been / are to be translated. Do you get approached by the original publishers or authors, or is it more the translators who would approach you to suggest work?
I can answer this from my perspective briefly. So we actually have dealt with a few publishers directly that we have relationships with, who will send us whether sometimes we help promote forthcoming titles. So if there's a book coming out, we might excerpt it to increase its visibility and help with promotion of that book, because we view our platform also as a means to just celebrate voices that we love, even if we're not the original publisher of the work. We're passionate about translation and international literature. And we also have relationships with original authors and translators. Sometimes we deal more with the original authors and the translators, and sometimes the translators. So we, all across the board, we have different kinds of relationships.
I mean, I would say too, I mean, the work that comes to us comes through various sources. One obvious and an important one being through translators as well, but also through agents and through publishers. Yeah, from throughout the world. So there's sort of, there are a lot of different ways in which you know, the work sort of comes to us, but translators certainly are and always have been a crucial part of that, and is definitely a you know, that is should I say, that's a submission channel, for lack of a better term, that we've always sought to sort of privilege and to cultivate, particularly because that is often how you get to some of the more interesting work as well, right?
Great. Sohini, if you don't have anything to add, I will move on to the next question. We have a question here from Tanya. Would love to hear more about technological innovations or advances with digital publishing that are either showing promise or threatening the work of these publications.
I can just speak really quickly to that. I mean, one of the things more recently that I think has a lot of, I mean, it's funny, we're speaking about sort of digital literary publications, which is certainly a niche, but it's also something that's, it's sort of an issue that's also concerning, say, larger publishers, you know, media outlets and that sort of thing. We were speaking about, you know, SEO earlier, and you know, changes that Google has made or is making in terms of how it, you know, when you insert a query, sort of how, you know, what it returns and how it decides what a quality answer is, you know, and how AI is sort of threatening that. And the thought anyway is that some of the more recent changes that Google is making could potentially demote, so to speak, in terms of smaller publications, in terms of where they show up in a search ranking. So it's certainly something that we're looking at. It's also obviously a resource question too, right? Because when you have these, and I think that is ultimately one of the challenges, sort of as a, you know, as a nonprofit digital literary publication, is that you know, every time the search engines make one of these changes, if you're a large business or something like that, right, you probably have a department dedicated to solving this issue. Whereas, you know, with digital publication, or with public, you know, literary publications, generally speaking, there's often not that department, or if there is that department, I mean, we have a digital department at a very small one at WWB, That's certainly not the only thing that we're solving for. So it's I think to just give one example, that's certainly something that is a bit concerning, and it's also concerning, obviously, in terms of sort of the plurality of what is fed to some, of what you can access rather easily through a Google search, right? You're going to get a much smaller. Google's going to pull from a much smaller set of information sources, so to speak. So we'll see how it plays out. It's very much in the beginning, but that's certainly something that's at the top of my mind.
Yeah. As a consumer, I know that every time an algorithm change hits, my feed and searches get way skewed off, and I can't imagine what it's like as the digital editor, that colossal like block to move around, as it were. Andrew, Sohini, would you also like to speak to this? Okay.
I think for me, I mean, more generally, with one of our projects that we're working on is actually related to AI and anti-coloniality and literature, and inviting people to send us work that interrogates the relationship between AI and AI tools and the writer, the changing role of the writer, thinking about, because the changes are pretty much inevitable and it's impacting writers a lot, and also compensation for translators is impacted. So it's something that we're very cognizant of, but more in terms of like the relationships of the writers than the actual digital space. But I know that all these algorithms are very funny, and it's hard to keep track of their shifting impact.
Something to keep your eye on. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Let's take this one from, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, Nermeen. Any tips for new translators/writers without publications? How can we increase our chance of getting our first job?
I mean, I feel like, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean, I feel like there's always, and I can still, even though it's been a while, I can still sort of remember that anxiety around getting the first publication, and it certainly does feel like after that, that things become a lot easier. I think in terms of increasing, your chances, I guess. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is obviously, reading the reading publications that you're thinking about submitting to see, also in terms of, respecting your own time and your own effort and work, and making sure that it's a good place, in fact, to submit your work. I think there's also, whether it's I mean, this is a virtual event, but there are plenty in person as well. There are chances, to reach out and to strike up a conversation with editors and at publications, whether it's an event for that publication or whatever, or even an email that shows that you sort of know what they do, right, in terms of like what the publication, what sort of work it's looking for, et cetera, and striking up a conversation about what you're working on too. I mean, I think it's one of the things that's also worth thinking about in those terms too, is that you have this anxiety about sort of getting the first publication, which we all have had and know very well. But it's also about constructing a relationship that, maybe you will have a writer that will be a right fit for that publication 2 years from now too, right? So it's worth thinking about. Editors are people too, just like you are. So it's about creating a relationship as well, and sort of introducing yourself as someone who does, works with this language and works with these sort of writers. And it's pitching your own work, but also if an editor knows this and has had a conversation with you and suddenly, is thinking about putting together an issue or is looking for a certain type of work that happens to very much fit with what you do, your name will probably come up. So I think I would say, I'm speaking for myself, but I also think for a lot of editors, we're rather approachable, and generally interested in in the sort of work that you're doing. So I think it's a matter of forging those relationships and starting a conversation.
I think that's a great answer, Eric. If I can, we need to wind down, but if I can just recommend a resource in case people are looking for different journals, magazines, publishers, grants that you can search through and see what matches the work that you're doing. I'm afraid, I hope I'm not saying her name wrong. Charlie Kum put together the Literary Translation Database Extraordinaire. It's a massive, wonderful resource. It's a Google spreadsheet. If you just Google Literary Translation Database Extraordinaire, you'll find a huge list that's always being updated, and I definitely recommend that. So if you don't mind me throwing in a recommendation there at the end. All right, that's our plenary session. I want to give a huge thanks to BCLT for hosting, of course, to Mayada Ibrahim for organizing these sessions and for the invite to have this exciting conversation, to my fellow panelists, Andrew, Eric, and Sohini, and of course the audience for engaging with us today. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye. Thank you.